Now we can start.
All right. Well, thanks, Danielle, and I'm always happy to share information about Malaysia. As we're saying, it's a good market. It's There's a lot I think that to recommend it to U.S. Ag exporters. So anyway, looking forward to chatting today. I have noticed a little bit of a internet lag here. So Danielle, if you have trouble hearing me, stop me, let me know, and I'll try to connect on my phone instead. If it becomes a problem. So anyway, again, thanks for having me, giving me the opportunity to chat a little bit about Malaysia today. Um, as Danielle mentioned, I've been here for 4 years and winding down my time. And it's certainly been an interesting place to be. And I think a little known destination for U.S. products, but still a pretty good market for us given its kind of relative size, and a good kind of entry point into Southeast Asia, which has a lot of growth potential, and it has been a big focus of our trade diversification efforts over the past few years. So, looking forward to chatting. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so I'll give just a kind of brief overview of the kind of big picture for Malaysia. It's a country there, kind of in the center of Southeast Asia, as you can see on the little map inset. Population of 34 million people, and it's what the World Bank considers a upper middle income country. So it has some good purchasing power, a really clear, you know, kind of more wealthy class, as well as a growing, strong middle class. That is the main kind of target of our efforts. The demographically, it's a majority Muslim for the Malay population, but there's also a sizable Chinese population, and I think there are maybe 25%, and an Indian population, maybe 5 to 10%. So also a fairly diverse country, a lot of different types of foods and cuisines here, and Malaysians love to eat. There's a real interest in new flavors and different types of foods, in innovation in food, and so I think all of those are certainly positive for U.S. exporters that are looking to enter the market here. Next slide. I do want to highlight kind of a little bit about the geography of Malaysia as well. So people will talk about East and West Malaysia, or Peninsular Malaysia, excuse me, and Malaysian Borneo. So essentially, the country is split into two different parts. One there on the peninsula, kind of south of Thailand, part of the mainland of Asia, and that's where the capital, Kuala Lumpur, where the embassy is based. That's where it's located, which is really the big hub city for Malaysia. The other kind of larger cities like Penang and Johor are also in peninsular Malaysia, and that's where a lot of the buying power is kind of concentrated, I would say. More urban, and a lot more imported products available. On the island of Borneo, which, as you can see, is shared with Brunei and Indonesia as well, part of Indonesia. There are two different states, Sabah and Sarawak, based on the way that they kind of joined Malaysia, when Malaysia kind of formed as a country, 60 some years ago. Those two states retained a number of rights. So they actually have sometimes different regulations for agricultural products. So that's something to keep in mind. It can sometimes take an extra step to export products to Malaysia and to Sabah and Sarawak states. They are a bit more, I guess, low density population and a lot more spread out. but there is, I think reasons to continue looking at certain products that are have been successful in Malaysia in Borneo side. Um, Sabah is a big kind of tourism hub. A lot of Asian tourists go there for golfing. There's, I think, a lot of more resorts that are popping up there as well. So that's something to look at. And Sarawak State has a lot of oil wealth and has really done a lot to invest and kind of grow, particularly in their main city, Kuching. So again, it's a slightly different market. If you are speaking with importers eventually at trade shows and things, you might want to inquire whether they have distribution um, in both East and West Malaysia, because that could be a factor in kind of how much product the importers are able to take. Next slide. Um, so Malaysia is a big food importer. While there are some production of tropical products here, they're quite dependent on imports for a number of staples as well as a number of products that go into the pretty large food manufacturing sector here. So you see it's about $28 billion worth of agriculture and related products that went into Malaysia. But the US is only a relatively small share of that because it is quite a competitive market. So last year you see we're about 4%, and there are a number of other kind of regional food players as well as the big kind of agricultural producing countries that are a bit ahead of us. Next slide. Yeah, this slide shows just kind of uh, overview of some of the top products that we currently export to Malaysia. Um, you see, soybeans and dairy products are two really big ones, but it's fairly diverse. Dairy products, some of those are like consumer ready products like cheeses or ice cream. A lot of it is dry milk that's going into the food manufacturing sector. Um, Food preparations are anything from stocked cereals to soups to anything that you might kind of see in the grocery store shelves as well as a number of other ingredients and things that go into food processing. So it's a pretty good mix. I think there are opportunities for most product here. We'll go into some of the challenges in a minute, but I think currently we've seen pretty good spread, a pretty good mix of products and across all of the categories that we work on. Next slide. Um, just speaking about opportunities and challenges, as I mentioned, Malaysia imports from a lot of different countries, and I think that it's reflective of their openness to trade. They have fairly low tariffs generally. Most products don't face too significant regulations that are a problem, and there are good signs in terms of increasing tourism, rising GDP that do make it an attractive market. Um, at the same time, that openness does make it quite competitive. We don't have a free trade agreement with Malaysia, but some of our big competitors, like Australia, China, and others, do have some preferential access in certain categories of foods and agricultural products. So that it can be a fairly competitive market in for certain products. Um, there are a few products also that face some regulatory challenges, including halal certification requirements that we'll focus on here in just a moment. Next slide. We look at kind of three major sectors at FAS here. One is the retail food sector, the food processing sector, and then the kind of institutional sector, which includes kind of tourism and restaurants and food service. For retail foods, I think we've seen pretty good growth recently of more high-end kind of premium grocery stores that are emerging. This is especially true in, Kuala Lumpur and kind of the big cities. But we've seen a few also in even in Borneo, starting up. A major retailer here that's based in Kuala Lumpur recently bought a chain in Borneo as well, and is kind of trying to increase the premium offerings there. So there does seem to be some pretty strong growth for the imported products at the retail level. As with a lot of places, kind of health and wellness foods as well as convenience are very important recently. Malaysia also has a very large food processing sector, which is an area that I think offers a lot of opportunities for U.S. ingredients inputs. As mentioned, they do have a lot of free trade agreements with other countries, which makes it a good place to do processing, so that a product could be processed here and then exported to a country with preferential tariff access, which makes it more affordable. It's also a kind of focus area of the government, a lot of effort into developing the food processed here and exported out. And so we do see a lot of growth for new and innovative products there. And sometimes processors need a little bit of assistance, with samples or recipes or how to use products, but they've been very receptive and very interested. The HRI sector or food service does seem to be rebounding. In general, Malaysians really like to eat out. It's very common pastime, and so I think the domestic food service industry is pretty active and developed. We've also seen recently a kind of increase in tourism, post-COVID, including a number of big U.S. hotel chains like Marriott that have made partnerships here in Malaysia to open a number of additional locations. So that I think, again, will continue to drive tourism and present some opportunities for the tourism sector moving forward. Next slide, please. In terms of distribution, it's, I think, pretty standard with other countries. We see some of the larger retailers, for example, or larger food manufacturers that will directly import certain products. Probably the majority work through agents or importers that are, servicing a number of different clients here. So we've seen all of them. I think depends kind of on your strategy. Certain like retail products will be really attractive to specific retail chains, that are kind of marketed to marketed as having imported products or featuring kind of these more niche products, and that might be the best option to just work directly with that retailer. In other cases, if it's something that has potential for wider distribution, it may be better to work through an importer. And again, you can, when you're having conversations with importers, it's important to find out kind of where they have their distribution. Does it include both East and West Malaysia? Some importers also work in Singapore, which could be helpful for volume. So that's something to consider and ask about when you're having conversations with importers here in Malaysia. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, generally, Malaysia has, we don't intend to have too many regulatory problems. the vast majority of products come in here, pretty smoothly. Um, most labeling and those types of challenges can be addressed pretty easily by working with importers who are used to bringing in imported products and used to putting stickers with the right type of information and that sort of thing. However, there are a few products that tend to face more challenges than others. And in part, a lot of those are animal products, so meat, poultry, and dairy products. Um, and these all require kind of two different things. One is approval from the veterinary authority for every plant that's exporting any meat, poultry, or dairy products to Malaysia. So that involves the submission of a um, application form with a lot of supporting documentation to the veterinary authority, working through our office here in KL to get that to the competent authority, and can take several months for them to review that and get approval. For beef plants and poultry plants, additionally, the officials from Malaysia will have to go physically to the plant in the United States and do an inspection of that plant. So it can be a lengthy process. It can be a kind of frustrating process, but we have had success with going through that. But it's certainly something to keep in mind, kind of when you're developing your plans if you're exporting those products. For the other kind of aspect of those for meat, poultry, and dairy products is that all of those require halal certification to export to Malaysia. That's a regulatory requirement. And so that is something also you need to factor in. And at this point, I'll also note that even if your product doesn't fall into one of those categories that require mandatory halal certification, it is a good idea kind of while you're looking at to think about halal certification if you don't have it already. The reason is that even if it's not a regulatory kind of requirement, sometimes it is kind of a commercial necessity to have the halal certification, depending on what market you're trying to penetrate. For retail products, it's not always necessary, and so there are a number of retail products here that don't have halal certification. However, if you're going into food service or food processing, the customer will almost always require that because their own halal certification here in Malaysia is dependent on only sourcing halal certified products. I always give the examples of, say, McDonald's and Starbucks here in Malaysia. Both of those companies have all of their Malaysian outlets halal certified. So in order to, even sell, for example, dried blueberries to go into scones that are going to be served in Starbucks, for example, you would have to get those dried blueberries certified halal. So brings me to the next slide, please, which shows the current 3 halal certification bodies in the U.S. that have been approved by JAKIM, which is Malaysia's halal authority. So these 3 organizations have been approved by Malaysia to as are recognized as being able to certify products as being halal to Malaysia's halal standard. So again, if you are interested in exporting here, and particularly if you're trying to get into food service or into the food processing sector, I would encourage you to reach out to one or all of those companies and find out about halal certification. I think whether or not you decide to do it can depend on the importer interest, but inform your conversations with importers. If you're here at a show, if you'd considered halal certification already and kind of know what the costs and the uh, steps would be to complete that. And onto the last slide. So again, here's our contact information. I'm, as mentioned, based here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and our office also covers Singapore and Brunei. Here in Malaysia, we have a team of there's 6 of us normally. So myself, my deputy, Catherine, and then we have 4 local staff that work with us here. We also have 2 local staff in Singapore that cover that market. So we're happy to answer questions or assist companies who are interested in either of those markets, as well as Brunei, though it's not as active as a market as Malaysia or Singapore. As mentioned, I won't be here in July when the trade show here comes, the CL show in July. But my team will be there. I think they're planning to attend the show and offer support where needed. So please reach out to us if you're planning to go. If you have questions, always respond to those, and also to share information from our reporting that we've done. If there's a specific topic that you're interested in or a sector, we have some reports that we've published on those topics, and happy to share that information as well. So that's all for my presentation. But Danielle, back to you, and happy to answer any questions that folks have.
Thanks so much, Tim. That was great. A good overview of the market. If anybody has questions, put them in the Q&A. We will get to those. And I have a question to start it off. And I feel like maybe I should know this, but what's the language that's most commonly spoken?
Oh, so generally the language of business tends to be English here. So we're fortunate in that way. It's pretty easy, particularly in the big cities. The majority of the population does speak Bahasa Malay, which is similar to Indonesian, which is kind of the more local language. But again, English education here is generally pretty good. Most people will speak English, particularly importers and people who are used to doing business, foreigners.
Okay. And in terms of retail packaging, how big of a lift is it to get into compliance with labels for that?
There are some specific requirements here in Malaysia. A lot of, I think, for example, I believe there's some differences in like the nutritional labeling, like the amounts that the serving size, or the how the nutrition values are reported. But again, I think most of the big importers are used to this. They'll put a sticker on it that addresses those concerns. Also you see on all kinds of products here, usually small little stickers with the importer's details, the name and address. So it's fairly common. I think, again, importers are mostly just sticking those on here. So that's something that probably needs to be worked out in any kind of contract. But I think generally most products are not specifically like repackaged or relabeled for the Malaysian market. They've just been stickered to comply with the regulations.
Okay, and that's okay. Great. All right, we do have a question. And do we have to switch the logo to a different language for Malaysia?
Yeah, so labeling can be in English for imported products. It can be in English only. It doesn't need to have any Bahasa on it.
Okay, great. You know what else I'm gonna do really quickly? I'm gonna share my screen so we can take a peek at the Food and Drinks Malaysia event that we are going to have a Sesta Pavilion at. It is July 1st to the 3rd in Kuala Lumpur. Okay. Controls, share. Okay. So if you go to our events page, you will see Food and Drinks Malaysia, which is a pretty new show, I believe, but it's being put on by the CL Group. So they do, Paris and a lot of the big trade shows around the world. So, an experienced trade show operator. Um, and yes, it's a 3-day show coming up. It is definitely our first time over there. So we're excited to give this opportunity to our companies to explore Malaysia and yeah, get over there, see the show, meet the importers. And I would imagine it will draw quite a good crowd from other countries. I would imagine Singapore and other neighboring countries will also be traveling there for this show. I know, Tim, do you have any insight into this? I know it's new for you all as well.
Yeah, I think as you say, it's either new or it's recently taken over by Cial, but certainly not one that had been on our radar previously. But it does seem like this year there's some interest from a number of U.S. Groups to promote there. That usually it's in the fall that is kind of a always an inconvenient time for us, particularly, but called Food Hotel Malaysia. And I know that other groups have found that very successful. They said, Malaysian buyers are coming to these shows like ready to do deals, and like the folks that they attract seem to be really good contacts. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for the shows that are here in Malaysia, and so we're interested to see again that this will be kind of the first time that we're paying close attention to this particular show, but I think people seem to be excited about it. So looking forward to kind of seeing how it goes, and getting your feedback afterwards to see if it's something that's worth maybe doing a bigger USDA presence at.
Sure, absolutely. And here you can see exactly what comes with the Susta booth. A corner booth is $1,200 and an inline booth is $1,000. It's a 9 square meter booth with standard furniture. And we will provide interpreters if you would like one. And we will reimburse up to $250 to ship your samples and materials to the show. So a good opportunity if this is a market that you're interested in. And it looks like we have a few more questions coming in. Hey, so one of the slides mentioned difficulties with the Middle East boycott. If a company is American Jewish, is it a good market to go into, or should that be a concern?
Yeah, it's hard to give advice about this as the situation tends to change. I think in the earlier days of the Gaza kind of crisis, there was kind of an organized effort here by some NGOs to kind of come up with a list of companies that were perceived as supporting Israel in some way, kind of vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And so a lot of those ended up being kind of multinational companies, but that had an American, kind of origins. So, for example, Starbucks, McDonald's, really a lot of them were quick service restaurants. Um, you know, there's actually those companies here in Malaysia don't use very many U.S. products, so it didn't necessarily have as big of an impact. There was a smaller impact on retail, but for a few products that we saw that really had very prominent like American branding, that kind of took a hit for a little while. That has seemed to have died down now. We don't quite see the same level of opposition. I think it will depend on U.S. policy moving forward and kind of what comes out of the White House and what the kind of the administration tends to focus on in the Middle East. So I think that's something that can change and present challenges, but I wouldn't say currently there doesn't seem to be a real necessarily an anti-American across the board sentiment. Most of kind of what we were seeing was specific companies that for various reasons that again I don't you can debate about whether those were good reasons or not, ended up on a list. So again, a bigger problem for kind of the quick service restaurant brands, somewhat less on retail, and really no impact at all on the food ingredients, food processing sector, because those companies were still happy to work with U.S. Suppliers.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I know that's a little sensitive, but appreciate the guidance. All right, another question. We have experience in exporting and have a unique halal product, which is in high demand. Plant certification seems to be a major impediment in exporting to Malaysia. How long does this take and who pays for it?
Yeah, so the to just apply, so depending, it depends a little bit on the product, but for example, we do a lot of dairy plant registrations. We have, I think, hundreds that are dairy plants that are registered here. Typically, I would say it can take maybe 3 to 6 months, usually, to get something registered. Sometimes it can be faster. In some cases, recently it has taken longer, but in the kind of just depends on the personnel turnover that the Malaysian government has. I think currently we're in a good place that things have sped up, and we have have been able to get our plants done a bit quicker. So in some cases it just takes a couple months, but I would say minimum you're looking at 2 months. Usually within 6 months it's done for dairy plants. There's no cost to that, but again, it's just a matter of filling out the paperwork. You actually have to send the documents to our office because we need to put a cover letter on it and physically take a hard copy to the ministry here.
Oh, wow.
So we will, if you're interested, please reach out to us. We can give you more information about the forms. We did a report on this recently too, because there's some new forms. And so that's something that we can easily, assist with. There's no cost to that registration process. For meat products, if it requires an inspection, that is charged back to the plant that is doing the inspection. Usually the plant that's being inspected. The cost of the Malaysian inspectors to fly to the US, any kind of local transportation required, and I think the hotels are covered by the requesting plants. So that's something that we try to coordinate so that there's kind of a number of plants so that the cost gets shared between the different participants. And so if that's something you're interested, again, we can work with you on that and try to guide you through the process.
But that's meat
And
specifically, correct?
that would be, yeah, any kind of halal meat, beef or poultry mainly. Yeah.
All right. We have halal certification from HTO, which is one of the most respected halal certification organizations. Will that be accepted via one of the others? For example, usually ISA except HTO.
I am not sure about that. I don't know like the different arrangements between halal certification bodies. HTO is not recognized by Malaysia. I think it is like, for example, in Indonesia, but not here. From Malaysia's perspective, it has to be a certification from one of the three that were indicated. So, ISA, um, uh, American Halal Foundation, or IFANCA are the three that are approved here. So again, I'm not quite sure if there are other kind of arrangements that where HTO can work with others, but from Malaysia's perspective, the certificate has to come from one of those three certification bodies.
Okay. All right. And one last question. I was surprised at the volume of pork imported more than beef. Why does this occur in a Muslim country?
So yeah, there is, as I mentioned, a sizable Chinese population that tends to prefer pork, and the Indian Hindu population also eats pork, but doesn't eat beef. Um, so we've seen a pretty big growth in the last few years of pork, in part because Malaysia's pork sector has really been hit hard by some disease problems, African swine fever. So they used to produce their own pork, but have had really struggled to keep up with demand in the past, 5 years ago with their own production. So yeah, we've seen a lot of uh, good growth for that. It's also slightly easier to get a pork plant approved because it lacks the halal certification angle. Um, so we've struggled a bit with beef recently, particularly because larger beef operations, are can't always, because they're volume based, are really, I think, I find it challenging to meet some of the halal requirements that require, slower line speeds and things like that, that really would eat into their bigger business, which is, you know, uh, domestically mostly. So, yeah, that's why beef, currently we don't have any plants approved. We're working on some right now, and I think there's certainly a market here for U.S. beef. People ask us about it all the time, uh, but it's just a matter of I think finding a good U.S. supplier that's able to kind of jump through the additional hoops because the value proposition works for them.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I don't see any other questions coming in. Um, so that might be it. And if anyone does think of something and wants to talk later, either about the event or has a question for Tim, please be in touch. My team will be following up with an email that has a recording of today's um, webinar, as well as some more information. And I'll include a link to the Food and Drinks Malaysia show. And yeah, it's always so interesting to learn and understand about these places that are so far from here, but that USDA has a presence, and there are so many resources to help us learn. So we really appreciate you taking the time and staying up late, Tim.
No, my pleasure. And thanks for the opportunity to chat with you all. Yeah, I hope a lot of you decide to come for the show. Again, it's an interesting market and a really exciting place to be right now. So,
Wonderful.
as
Thank
you
you
said,
so
please be in
much.
touch.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.